Shoes. Must find my shoes. Unhand me, madam. Hey, welcome to Class Act Media. I'm Jack, and we have hit probably one of my favorite actors to ever play the Doctor, Jon Pertwee. You know what, let's not even drag this intro out any longer. I just want to get into it. Okay, first thing you're going to notice about the Pertwee era, color. It's amazing what a huge difference the addition of color makes to make Doctor Who more engaging and fun to watch. I'm absolutely not saying that it was boring when it was in black and white, far from it, but being in color just makes it more interesting to watch for me because I'm a little baby man who's easily distracted by pretty colors. Alright, enough about the wonders of color TV technology, let's talk about the Doctor. The first thing you'll probably notice about him is his dress sense. The ruffled shirts, the velvet jackets, and the capes all come together to make the most outlandish wardrobe the Doctor's ever had. Okay, most outlandish up to that point. I'll get to you in a later video. Get out of here. Clothing aside, the third Doctor's personality toned down the goofiness the second Doctor had while dialing up the arrogant aspect of his character. He was always the smartest guy in the room and he knew it.
Seems as though you may be right, Doctor.
I usually am.
This Doctor was very dismissive of the people around him. He felt that he was always the only one who knew what needed to be done and had no time for the nonsense of anybody else. Well, that's how he started anyway, but I'll come back to that in a minute. For now, let's talk about his companions, the first of which being Liz Shaw. Liz was a unit scientist who showed up at the very beginning of the third Doctor's run, but only stuck around for one season. She was the only one smart enough to keep up with the Doctor at the time, and as such, the only person that he showed any respect to. Liz was fine, but she was a bit too similar to the Doctor's personality to the point where there wasn't much for him to work off of, and vice versa. After Liz was unceremoniously dumped from the show, we got the defining companion of the third Doctor era, Jo Grant. Jo was adorable, courageous, adventurous, and brought a much-needed sense of positivity and optimism back to Doctor Who. The third Doctor's run before Jo, while excellent, was pretty dark and grim, dealing with some really heavy themes. Jo did a lot to soften this meaner version of the Doctor up, and thanks to her, he ended his run a much kinder and light-hearted character. That's one of the reasons I like the first Doctor more than the second Doctor. While the first Doctor grew and changed due to him being around his companions, mostly Ian and Barbara, the second Doctor was a lot more stagnant as a character. Giving the Doctor actual character growth again does a ton to make the show much more engaging. And even without mentioning the character growth that Jo helped to give the Doctor, their friendship is just adorable.
Glad to have you aboard, Miss Grant.
Glad to be aboard, Doctor.
Jo's goodbye from the show is also really well done. She gets engaged to this hippie doctor guy who she decides to travel the Amazon with. At their engagement party, the Doctor silently realizes that his best friend has outgrown him. So, he finishes his drink and leaves without saying a word. It's been part of his character since he was the first Doctor. He hates endings and he hates goodbyes. And then Jo was immediately replaced with Sarah Jane Smith, who was fine. She carries over into the fourth Doctor's run, so I'm sure I'll have much more to say about her in the next video, but here she's just fine. Her chemistry with the Doctor isn't great, but to be fair, I don't know how anybody was supposed to follow Jo. In addition to the traditional companions, we also had a couple pseudo-companions / recurring characters. During most of this era, the Doctor worked as the chief scientific advisor to UNIT, under the supervision of Brigadier Alastair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, who I'll just call the Brigadier. He and the Doctor had a sort of love-hate relationship with each other, since the Brigadier was a very stern, serious, and by-the-book type, which often clashed with the Doctor's more outside-the-box approach to problem-solving, and that dynamic is always fun to watch.
I've had about all I can stand of this pompous, self-opinionated idiot here. Brigadier, my dear fella, I wonder whether I could borrow a couple of your stalwart chaps to give me a hand in bringing the TARDIS back. It's landed in rather an inaccessible position.
Pompous, self-opinionated idiot, I believe you said, Doctor?
And I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention Sergeant John Benton. He's not a particularly big or important character, but he's just such a chill dude that I love it every time he shows up in a story. Between him, Jo, and the Brigadier, the third Doctor had one of the best supporting casts in all of Doctor Who. Here's the transition part to where I talk about the stories. I don't really have anything to say here, I just want to show off this costume I made. It's good, right? You can't really tell with the jacket, but this shirt is huge. The third Doctor's era introduced a couple new elements to the Doctor Who lore. We got the first official naming of regeneration, as well as getting the name of the homeworld of the Time Lords, Gallifrey. But by far, the biggest addition to the show was the introduction of the series' best villain, the Master. He's a renegade Time Lord, childhood best friend of the Doctor, and he's bent on domination of Earth. The introduction scene for the Master is excellent and perfectly sets up the menace that he presents. First of all, we start by hearing the familiar sound of the TARDIS's engine, which right away should raise suspicions, since at this point, the Doctor's TARDIS was completely out of commission since he was still trapped on Earth by the Time Lords. And when we start to see something materialize, it's not the blue box we've all come to expect, but instead a white van. And the man who steps out is not the Doctor, but a sinister man with a goatee. And then they proceed to shoehorn him into almost every story from that point on. Yeah, the Master is a great villain with an amazing relationship to the Doctor, but he's used so often that eventually I found myself saying, "Oh, come on, the Master again?" fairly often. It's kind of like with Batman, how he's got this great rogues gallery, but writers only want to use the Joker because that's who the people want to see. I'm not saying the Master is bad. Like I said earlier, I think he's the best villain in Doctor Who history, but it's possible to have too much of a good thing. Okay, enough about the Master. Let's talk about the real best characters in the show, the Doctor's cars. Since the TARDIS didn't work for most of the Third Doctor's run, he had to get some new modes of transportation until he got it up and running again. The first of these was his car that he called Bessie, which had a great little aesthetic that made it super charming. But forget Bessie, the Doctor's best car was a hover car called, and I am not joking here, the Who-mobile. Okay, so it wasn't ever called that in the show, but Jon Pertwee called it the Who-mobile in interviews, so I'm considering it canon. The behind-the-scenes story of the Who-mobile is also amazing. The story goes that it was never intended to be part of the show. Jon Pertwee just wanted the Doctor to have a hover car, so he commissioned one himself and told the writers to put it in. That's incredible. Okay, you know the drill by now, and if you don't, then you should have watched my first 2 Doctor Who videos. It's time for the top 5 Third Doctor stories. Number 5, The Three Doctors. This was the first ever crossover between multiple actors who portrayed the Doctor, with William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton returning to play the first and second Doctors respectively. The Time Lords have discovered a threat to universal safety that will require more than one Doctor to stop. The Time Lord responsible for the creation of time travel, Omega, who was long thought to be dead, has returned to exact his revenge on his race who he feels abandoned him. Omega is one of the best one-shot villains in Doctor Who history. Do not at me on this.
No, not forgotten. All my life I've known of you and honored you as our greatest hero.
A hero? I should have been a god!
And of course, it's just fun to see the first 3 Doctors interacting with each other. This is William Hartnell's last time ever playing the Doctor, and sadly he was too weak to walk around the set, so he just showed up on the TARDIS's video screen every so often to provide advice. All in all, this is a really fun story with 3 legendary actors all playing the same great character. Number 4, Frontier in Space. The Doctor and Jo arrive on a spaceship in the far future, where the Milky Way galaxy is largely dominated by 2 empires, the humans and the Draconians. Tensions between the 2 races are high, war is imminent, and a mysterious figure works in the shadows to stoke the flames. It's the Master, by the way. I guess that's a spoiler, but in this era of the show, if there's a mysterious figure trying to manipulate a tense political situation for his own gain, it's probably the Master. I always love when the aliens aren't portrayed as the outright villains, and this story portrays the 2 sides of the conflict in a very fair light. The 2 cultures are also very well fleshed out. I felt like I had a good understanding of future humanity and the Draconians by the end of it. Plus, it's very Star Trek inspired, and it wears that on its sleeve. I mean, come on, it's called Frontier in Space. I don't know how much more obvious they can make it. Number 3, The Claws of Axos. A group of aliens calling themselves Axons arrive on Earth offering a miracle substance called Axonite, which they claim can solve all of humanity's problems. Of course they have sinister ulterior motives, as they, their ship, and the Axonite are all part of one singular being called Axos. That idea alone is really cool, but this serial really shines when the Master shows up. This is the first time he's not portrayed as the big bad villain, but instead he's just trying to survive and helping any side that benefits him. He even works with the Doctor for a bit, and this all comes together into the best Master story of this era. Number 2, Doctor Who and the Silurians. The Silurians, a race of reptilian creatures who were once the dominant species of Earth, have begun to come out of their subterranean home in order to take back the surface world from humanity. I really like that the Silurians aren't portrayed as the bad guys in this story. The Doctor's goal is to sympathize with them and negotiate peace rather than simply defeat them, since he sees that they have just as much claim to Earth as people do. The debate between the Silurians is great too, with some of them wondering if their time is past while others are militant to kill off mankind. I love when Doctor Who presents a tough moral choice like this, and not to spoil anything, but the ending is really dark and does a lot to add to that question. It's just a shame that apparently the person who wrote the story's title didn't get the memo that the Doctor's name isn't Doctor Who. Number 1. Inferno. A research station has built a drill designed to reach the center of the Earth, but UNIT is very concerned about the possible repercussions. Meanwhile, the Doctor, while trying to fix the TARDIS, accidentally transports himself to an alternate universe where the drilling project is much further along, and the Earth is about to go up in flames because of it. First of all, the tension in this story is some of the most well done in all of classic Doctor Who. I was sitting on a couch while watching it, but if I was sitting on a regular seat, I'm sure I would have been on the edge of it. Oh no, I think I'm going to bad joke jail. Anyway, I think this story also does the best job of showing what's at stake. We see exactly what will happen if the Doctor doesn't get back to his universe in time. The Earth dies. Yeah, this one gets dark, and I've got to hand it to him for having the courage to go there. The third Doctor's run ended rather anticlimactically with him saving the universe from a giant telepathic spider. Because Doctor Who. That's right, Drake, I stole your thing. What are you gonna do, sue me? So Drake ended up taking everything in the lawsuit. So, well, I guess while I get back on my feet, I'll start watching the fourth Doctor's run, and that's gonna take a while. See you next time, guys, and a tear, Sarah Jane? No, don't cry. Where there's life, there's